A knit front and back increase, or KFB as it's often abbreviated to, is one of the easiest ways to add a new stitch to your knitting, and it's often the first increase method that beginners learn. We're going to work it by literally knitting into the front and back of this stitch. Before I do that, I just want to go over some terminology if you are a newer knitter. When I say the front of the stitch, I mean that I'm going to take my right needle tip and I'm going to go into my stitch from the front, like so, from front to back. When I want to knit into the back of a stitch, if I kind of flip this over, you can see there's a little leg of yarn at the back here. And what we want to do is go kind of to the back of the work, and then from right to left, go between the two legs of the stitch in this direction. So we're always going, when we're doing knitting a stitch, we're always going in between the two legs of the stitch. So we've got one leg here that's at the right, at the front of the needle, and one that's at the back of the needle to the left. So we're always going between the two legs. So knitting into the front, we go like this. Knitting into the back, we go like this. Let me show you how to do knit front and back. So I'm going to begin by knitting into the next stitch as I normally would, but I'm going to pause halfway through before I slip this old stitch off the left needle. So let me show you. So into the front, wrap the yarn, pull it through, and then don't slide the old stitch off. Instead, I'm going to take my right needle tip, go behind, and then between the two legs of that stitch again, from right to left, like so. That's called knitting into the back. Pull that through. You can see I've now got two new stitches on my right needle tip, and I'm going to slide this old stitch off my left needle now. That's our completed knit front and back increase. You can see my original stitch that I knit into looks kind of normal, and then it's got this little bump next to it with a new stitch coming out of it. It almost looks like a little purl bump, and that's my increased stitch. I'll show you that again. So knit into the front as normal, but don't slide the old stitch off, and then go behind, knit into the back, wrap the yarn, and slide the old stitch off. So there we've got our two new stitches, and they've been created from one stitch. I'll show you that Continental as well. I know sometimes it can be easier to follow the motions if it looks more like you're knitting. So I'm going to increase into this stitch, I'm going to knit into the front as normal, but don't slide this one off. And then I'm going to go behind to the back. And if you're knitting Continental, you do want to make sure that your right needle tip is going over your working yarn, that you're not catching it under your working yarn, because then you'll end up with another extra stitch. We're just trying to increase one. So make sure your needle tip goes over that working yarn, and then between the two legs of my stitch, didn't quite catch it there, and then slide that off the left needle. Show you that once more. So into the front as normal, scoop up some yarn, pull it through, and then to the back, making sure your right needle tip is over your working yarn, not under it. From right to left, through the stitch again, scoop up the yarn, pull a new loop through, and then slide the old stitch off. There we've got our two new stitches created out of one. For many projects, you'll want to work your increases in mirrored pairs. And knit front and back doesn't really have a left and right version, but you can work it in pairs quite effectively by using the sort of little bump that's created with your knit back part of your knit front and back, and carefully spacing those. Here's a good example. So in this case, I've just got a single marker, and what I've been doing is I've been working a knit front and back in the very last stitch before slipping that marker. So you can see here that's creating a column of those little bumps, because when I work my knit front and back, I'm placing the little bump on the left, so it's always just before the marker. So then that little bump is snuggled up next to the stitch that comes after the marker. And I've only got a single stitch in between my sets of little bumps, because what I'm doing after the marker, immediately after the marker, is I'm working another knit front and back. So my center stitch here is actually part of the second knit front and back. It's part of the second increase. Rather than having a single stitch in between my knit front and backs to create a center stitch, that center stitch is always going to be part of the second increase. If I wanted more stitches between my knit front and backs, I'd want to think about the same thing, that my second knit front and back is going to contribute to what looks like one of the stitches between my two increases. So if I wanted 2 stitches in between, I'd want to work knit front and back, a single knit one, and then another knit front and back. And that would give me the appearance of 2 stitches in between. In the same way, if I wanted 3 stitches in between, I'd work 1 single increase, 1 knit front and back, then 2 single stitches, single knit stitches, and then my second knit front and back. And that would give me 3 center stitches. So you do want to think about that you're always a little bit offset, that the knit front and back before your marker is only really contributing that bump to your kind of increase area, whereas the one after the marker is contributing the bump, but also a stitch before the bump. And that way you can use these bumps, which some people don't like because they aren't as smooth, they don't blend in as well to your knitted fabric, especially in stockinette, as some other increase techniques. But in this way, you can use those purl bumps as quite a nice decorative feature. So that might be something to experiment with. I also love the knit front and back increase in garter stitch, because it does just blend in beautifully and you don't really notice those extra bumps. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials and tips and tricks for leveling up your knitting. And you can find all of my patterns on isolde.com and on Ravelry. Thanks for watching. Bye!